It's November 3rd, 2021, a beautiful city of villages in Florida. My name is J McLaughlin. I'm here to do a series of interviews for the Korean War veterans to preserve your memory, first of all, and to honor their services, including you. But mostly it's to educate our young generations through the oral history and direct witnesses of the Korean War veterans who fought at the battle during the war from 1950 to 53, at the same time who saw the Korea in 1950s, and being able to compare that Korea with contemporary Korean society. Your case is special. You are the Korea defense veteran. You were not there during the war, but you are part of the Korea defense veteran who stationed in Korea, continue to defend South Korea from the communist attack if anything happened. So you are the legitimate heir of the Korean War veterans, and you saw also middle of Korea in between Korean War and now. So I think this is very appropriate. And I know that you have a very special career path. So that's what I want to hear from you. So it's my great honor and pleasure to meet you. And thank you for helping me all of this, including the one that you are working on, the PowerPoint and video programs that you can teach our young generations, right? Tell America program. So it's my great pleasure to meet you, sir. Please introduce yourself. What is your name, sir?
My name is William McLaughlin.
Your middle name is John.
William John McLaughlin.
Could you spell your last name?
McLaughlin.
McLaughlin.
Yes.
Your birthday?
26 June, 1950. And that date should resonate a bit. It was the day after
26.
It was the day after the Korean War broke out.
In 1950. So you are the Korean War boy.
Yeah, next day.
Next day. Ha! Where were you born?
Torrington, Connecticut.
Could you spell it?
Yes, Torrington, Connecticut.
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 Right. So tell me about your family background when you were growing up there.
I was just a normal kid. My mother was a high school teacher. My father owned a business.
What did she teach?
She was an English teacher.
Ah.
And, was very much into sports, very much into science, and very much into the space race of the 1950s and early 60s.
Yeah.
I'd always admired the soldiers from World War II in Korea, and but was quite surprised to become one.
Exactly. You never thought that you would become like one, right?
Correct.
What was your dream? What did you want to do?
Well, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. And while I was in college, I had applied to law school. I got accepted at the University of Miami Law School, only to be told by my draft board that they had other plans for me.
Ah, you were drafted.
So when I got out of Boston University, I got drafted.
So you graduated from Boston University?
Yes.
EU?
Yes.
When did you graduate?
1972.
Right. And what high school did you graduate?
The Loomis School.
Could you spell?
Yes, Loomis.
High school in where?
It's in Windsor, Connecticut.
Okay. And when did you graduate?
I graduated from high school in 1968.
1968. So that's another memorable year. Let me ask you this question. Did you know anything about Korea by the time that you graduated from high school?
I did not. I had relatives who had been in the Korean War, and my father would talk to me about the Korean War. Growing up in the 50s, you couldn't miss references to Korea. But
what do you mean by misreferenced?
They talked about the war. They talked about somebody who had served in Korea. you know, there were movies like The Manchurian Candidate and others. So there was some cultural references to the Korean War, but not any attempt to really educate one on it. There weren't a lot of movies, unlike World War II, where there were lots of movies on World War II.
But you were able to, at the time, was MASH there?
This was before MASH came on television.
Before MASH, yeah. Got it. So you didn't learn anything about Korea, even after the war?
Not very much.
Not very much?
Not very much.
Do you remember anything you learned from the school about Korea?
I just remember that it was very undeveloped. Life was very hard there. It was a poor country at the time. And when I got drafted, I had gotten married before I got drafted.
When was it drafted?
I was drafted in 1972. And one of my concerns was that I'd be sent to Korea as a newlywed, and with most tours in Korea being unaccompanied, I would have to leave my wife behind for a year, which seemed like a great disaster. And I counted my blessings at the time when I was sent to Germany, where I could at least bring my wife over.
That was the condition.
Well, the government didn't agree with it. You know, the government didn't pay for my wife to come over, but I was allowed to bring her.
No, to Germany.
Yeah.
Well, you were able to bring your wife to Germany, right?
Yeah, yes.
But still, you have to pay for it.
Right.
But you are not supposed to bring your wife to Korea.
Correct.
Why is that?
Because life was hard. There was concern about where we'd live, concern about where I would be. And I have to say that I was gratified when I was sent to Germany. At least, you know, my wife and I can be together.
Of course, of course. Who wants to be separate from the wife who just been married to you?
Right, right.
And also you knew about Germany, so you wanted to be in Germany rather than in Korea, right?
Correct.
Yep. Thank you for being honest.
That's absolutely what happened.
So drafted to what, Army or what?
Drafted into the Army.
Army.
And I served in an air defense unit.
Where?
It was a Dutch Air Force Nike Hercules missile unit in northern Germany, close to the Dutch border.
So you finally went to Germany then?
Yes.
Oh. When did you leave for Germany?
In the spring of 1973.
So you were there for, what was your specialty and what was your unit?
I was in the 509th U.S. Army Artillery.
What?
509th.
09th.
U.S. Army.
U.S. Army.
Artillery Detachment.
Detachment. So detachment means here,
We were
detached from what?
we were detached from an artillery group.
And what was your main mission in Germany? The missile, dealing with the missile?
We were assigned to a Dutch Air Force missile base. And the missiles were American Nike Hercules missiles.
Why is it Dutch Air Force?
The Dutch Air Force had these missiles.
In Germany?
In Germany. They were a NATO member.
Okay. What was your rank at the time?
I was a private.
Private. And mostly what was your duty?
Well, these missiles had nuclear warheads. And I was on the arming and maintenance team. We would do the daily checks. The U.S. had control of the warheads. The Dutch had control of the missiles, if that makes sense. So we would do all the servicing and maintenance of these nuclear warheads.
I mean, did you have any specialty to deal with this? Did you have engineering? What did you study in Boston University?
I originally was in a 6-year law program. You go to undergraduate business school for 3 years.
Yeah.
And then you go to Boston University Law School for 3 years. And my draft board said, well, if you go to law school after 3 years as an undergraduate, we're going to draft you. So I had to drop that and finish my 4 years as a business major.
So you didn't know anything about nuclear warhead?
No, they sent me to school.
What school?
Nike Hercules Missile School.
Could you spell it?
Yes, Nike.
Nike, okay. Hercules.
Hercules, Hercules.
LES. Nike Hercules missile.
Yes.
Can you describe what that missile does?
It's a 39-foot long anti-aircraft missile designed to shoot down high-altitude aircraft, specifically nuclear-armed bomber aircraft.
Earth to air.
Yes. And they had them in Korea.
Yeah.
And when I graduated from that training, I could have gotten sent to Korea, and I could have gotten sent to Germany.
And you were sent to Germany
I was
first.
sent to Germany. Right.
What kind of training did you receive? Where?
I received most of my training at Fort Bliss, Texas, and also some other additional Army training at a place called Oberammergau in southern Germany, down in the Alps.
So you were able to maintain the nuclear warhead?
Right.
Okay. Wasn't it dangerous, like radiations and... No?
We were draftees. We did what we were told to do. And we joked that these aren't real, they're filled with sand. They wouldn't let knuckleheads like us maintain these things if they were real.
And did you believe that?
No.
No. And nothing happened to you?
No.
Good.
Still here.
So you stayed there in Germany with your wife, and where was it?
It was in a little town called Verden, Vorden.
Verden. How long did you stay there?
Stayed there about 18 months, 19 months, 20 months.
And then what happened?
Then I got out of the Army.
Oh, you retired?
No, I was a private. My 2 years requirement was up. Got out. I worked for a year. I went to graduate school for a year. I was in the Army Reserve during that period, and that led me to re-enlist in the Army. I served a year apprenticeship in the infantry, and tried to get into a Ranger battalion at Fort Lewis, Washington. They were full of people in my job, which was as a mortar guy, and they said, well, would you consider going to Special Forces? So I went to Special Forces. I went to airborne school and Special Forces training, and eventually Ranger School and Scuba School and a variety of other schools.
Wow,
and
scuba too.
Yeah, and I was stationed at Fort Devens, Massachusetts, in the 10th Special Forces Group. And one day in the summer of 1981, I was walking down the street in the company area, minding my own business, and the battalion personnel NCO rode up on a bicycle. And he stops and he says, "How'd you like to go to Korea?"
No, thank you.
And I said, "Well, tell me more." And they said, "Well, the Special Forces Detachment in Korea is looking for a scuba qualified mortar background weapons man to go to Special Forces Detachment in Korea."
It's for you.
Yes. I later learned that there were only two of us in the Special Forces community at the time, scuba qualified mortar guys. And the other guy he was the first choice. He had been killed in a plane crash in the Philippines. And so I was kind of the default choice. And that's how I got selected to go to Korea.
Did you go with your wife at the time?
Well, going back on the story a little bit, I told the personnel NCO, that sounds interesting.
Yeah.
But I have to check with my wife. I can't commit to going overseas. Mm-hmm. And he told me that this is an accompanied tour. It's 2 years and you get to take your family with you. So I went home and my wife, God bless her, we had 2 little children. She said, "Yes, that sounds like an adventure. Mm-hmm. Where's Korea?" And so next morning I went back and said, we'll take the assignment. And this was maybe August of 1981. Mm-hmm. And they were in a real hurry to get me there. Normally I would have gone to free fall parachute school and to Korean language school en route, but they needed me right away because this other guy got killed. And so I didn't go to language school. I had to work that out once I got to Korea. And I didn't go to free fall parachute school. I had to do that once I got to Korea. And I left in late October of 1981 with my family. My son was about 18 months old. My daughter was about 4. And we flew the 16-hour trip into Osan, and were picked up by a member of Special Forces Detachment Korea, and he drove us all into Seoul. And that was our introduction to Korea, and the first time we'd seen it. Didn't quite know what to expect. At the time, the Korean government was building a place called Hanam Village in Hanam-dong, Seoul, basically a housing complex for American soldiers, high-rise apartments. And our building that we were to move into wasn't quite ready, so we spent our first month in Seoul living in a hotel room in the Hyatt Hotel on Namsan. And I would go to work every day, and my wife would take her 2 little kids, and they'd walk down Namsan into Itaewon and shop and sightsee, and then at the end of the day, they'd walk back up the hill to the hotel. My wife thought it was one of the coldest places she'd ever been, even though we grew up in upstate New York. And but eventually we moved into a month later, we moved into our apartment in Hanam-dong, and we stayed there the rest of the time. Very nice accommodations for my family, which we thank the Korean government for.
What was your rank at the time?
I was a staff sergeant when I got there. I would get promoted during the 3 years that I was there.
And unit?
Special Forces Detachment Korea.
Okay. So what did you do?
The mission of Special Forces Detachment Korea was to be a liaison between the Republic of Korea Special Forces and the 8th U.S. Army. The Korean Special Forces Special Warfare Center had, at the time, 7 Special Forces brigades, and each of us was assigned to one of those brigades as a liaison. So typically I would go out several times a week from our base in Seoul. Out, in my case, my brigade was located in Bupyeong, out near Incheon, and we would do whatever we could to be helpful. A lot of what our primary contact was the G3 staff of the brigade, so we did a lot of work with training. So what we do, our mission was to help them become more mission capable, and so we'd work on lots of training things. Some of them were prosaic. I would bring training films out from 8th Army, and they would videotape them for their use. In some cases, I gave classes. In other cases, we did a lot of parachute work with them. At the time, Korea did not have C-130 aircraft. They had older model C-123 aircraft. And, but yet in wartime, their missions were going to depend on those C-130 aircraft. So every month, we would bring in at least 3 C-130s. The brigades rotated. My brigade would have one every 3 months. Several of us would go to the departure airfield. We would link up with our brigade. We would jump master the troops. We'd load them on the aircraft, and then we'd head to a drop zone someplace. We would perform the initial safety checks on the aircraft, the initial jump mastering, and then we'd turn it over to the Korean Special Forces jump masters. But I still remember Ilbonjan, warnings on the plane and so on. So we did a lot of that. All our jumps were night jumps. They were equipment jumps. They were rough terrain jumps. They were all of them very interesting. We also did a lot of free fall parachuting with the Koreans. I had to be trained when I was there. As a staff sergeant, I was the junior man in this detachment. So everything that came up, well, the new guy needs to do that. He needs the experience. So, you know, when they needed to do a night equipment, January, you know, 10 degrees below zero parachute jump, the new guy got the job. And, but it was really good because it gave me a lot of experience very quickly. We also coordinated exercise support. At the time, U.S. forces ran 2 big exercises every year. There was one full eagle in the wintertime, in the November timeframe, and then there was another one, whose name escapes me, Ulchi Focus Lens or something.
Ulchi Focus, yes.
Earlier in the year.
What was the first one?
Full Eagle.
Full Eagle.
F-O-A-L.
F-O-A-L, okay.
Yes. Full Eagle. And that was a big one.
And Ulchi, yes.
And
so basically you were there as an advisory group for Korean special forces and training them and educating them.
right. We didn't call ourselves advisors, you know. These people were very well trained. We could add to their training and help them with training, but our main job was, it's a go-between.
So that worked in together in emergency cases.
Worked very well. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, even after the war, you graduated from Boston University in 1972 when Korea began its 5-year economic development plan in 1962. By the early 70s, Korea was quite developed, but you didn't know much about Korea before you left for Korea. Now, when is the latest time that you were in Korea?
I left in October of '84.
And that was the last time to be in Korea?
I was there briefly. I was taking an airplane from the Philippines back to the United States, and I was in transit at Kimpo Airport, and wishing that I could get a visa and go outside and enjoy Seoul for a few days. But
now you follow up with the Korean economy and Korean society, democracy, and so on, right?
Yes,
you
yes.
know what Korea stands for right now.
Yes, I do.
10th largest, biggest economy in the world, and very substantive democracy. So, give us comparison, the picture of comparison between Korea now, as much as you know, and the Korea you experienced in 1980s. How can you compare that?
well, in 1980, the country was rapidly developing. I mean, there was industrial activity going on everywhere. Just some things that Americans would know about. Samsung was making VCRs. They were fairly new to the business.
Ancient times.
But they weren't the top of the line was Sony in those days.
Yep.
Nowadays, Samsung is the top of the line. Same way with televisions. Lucky Gold Star was another manufacturer. Now they're LG. When I was there, the streets of Seoul were filled with Hyundai ponies.
Ponies.
Ponies, and I've taken them as taxis many times. And of course now Hyundai, their cars are everywhere here in the United States, and they're great, world-challenging cars. The Genesis brands, the Kias, really excellent. First world, they're not Kia ponies.
But did you see the potential for Korea to be the 10th largest economy in the world and largest semiconductor market share now when you were there in 1980s?
I did.
You did?
I did.
What did you think that Korea would become like this today?
When I was there, this was when Chun Doo-won was president. At one point, they were working on national economic plans, and the decision was made, in combination between the government and Samsung, that they would become a manufacturer of large-scale integrated circuits. And they were going to put their mind to that, and that they were going to become a leader in that business in the world. And of course, that's exactly what they've become. I used to, driving out to my brigade, I used to pass by a GTE factory, and they made fiber optic cables.
Yep.
So fiber optic cables at that time was pretty cutting edge technology, but here they were producing it there in Korea.
In Korea.
The Ulsan shipyard was making some of the biggest, very large crude carriers and other vessels anywhere. The Pohang Iron and Steel was, a world-class steel. So nothing surprised me. Also during this time, the Seoul subway was under construction in preparation for the 1988 Olympics. And so the subway construction was everywhere. And of course that also spurred development in rail transportation and electromotive rail car development and so on. I had occasion to take an overnight train from Seoul down to Busan, and it's a very well-developed rail system at that time. And of course, they've gone far beyond that now with high-speed rail and so on. So, am I surprised? No. I could see the building blocks of it that were already put in place before 1981 when I arrived.
So you now explain beautifully about this transformation and you expect it to be happening. What about military power? I was just in AUSA, Association of U.S. Army in Washington, D.C. There was a big exhibition of Korean military industry complex companies like Hanwha and so on. Now, do you know the rank of Korean military power in the world?
I confess that I don't, but I'm sure it's well up there.
Sixth largest. Sixth largest. What do you think about that? When you were there, when you were working with the Korean Special Forces team, and now, what do you think about those transformation?
Well, again, I'm not at all surprised. When I was there, they came out with the K1 rifle. They had been using kind of hand-me-down American weapons before that, and they were already manufacturing small arms. And when the K1 came into service, we went out and fired it and thought it was a really good rifle. Of course, now they've gone generations above that. There's at least the K2 and others. But there's a good photo of me firing a K1 for the first time. But the passion. Some things that always struck me about Korea. One, that's a Confucian societal element is concern about education, a passion for education. The Koreans in every case, whether it be in technology, in education, or in the military, there's always a passion for improvement. Mm-hmm. My brigade never stopped trying to improve and become more capable, and it was very impressive. And third, they know what they want to be excellent. It's not just a matter of improvement; it's becoming really good at it. And that's the social character.
Want to be number one.
It's a societal characteristic, not just something peculiar to the military or anything else. So I found those trends within Korean society to be very interesting. And of course, you can see the result of it. We provided a security umbrella for Korea to develop in, but the actual development is all a credit to the energy and smarts of the Korean people. I mean, I was always impressed by how hard everybody worked. Certainly, people in the military worked extremely hard.
We had a conversation over the lunch with Steve and Frank, and it has to be both relative terms. And you give opportunities, the other part has to have a will to develop and to be better. Yes. If that is not there, then it's not going to help, no matter how you help somebody else, right? Yeah. So I'm not warmongering, and I don't support for big military industry complex that has to be like living on conflicts and war and killings and so on. It's not good, but still we have to have those. And I'm just pointing out that such a great transformation from the South Korea who was attacked and without anything, now is the sixth largest military in the world.
and considering South Korea's defense needs, it only makes
Absolutely.
sense that with Korea's manufacturing capability, why wouldn't they make
Yep.
as much as they possibly could?
So from Korea, what did you take the career path? What did you? I heard. Steve gave me the article, but we didn't have time to read it. But I heard from someone that you did another career path, working in the security issues in the United States. Can you share that?
When my time in Korea was finished, I went back to the 10th Special Forces Group for a while, and then I went to a research assignment at Fort Meade, Maryland, and then I went to Delta Force at Fort Bragg, which is America's premier special operations and counterterrorism unit. And I was there for the last eight years of my career.
Until when?
Until 1997.
1997. Okay.
And I was a veteran of the Gulf War, and when I was at Delta, and I started working Iraq as soon as the invasion of Kuwait, and I kind of worked Iraq the entire time I was at Delta, doing various things.
2003, you mean?
From
1998, you mean Iraq War?
the 1991 Iraq War, 1990. They invaded Kuwait in August of 1990, and I worked Iraq from basically that time frame until my retirement. And partly on the basis of that, the United Nations hired me as a UN weapons inspector, working for the UN Special Commission.
Oh.
And I did that for a while, participated in planning in New York. I retired at Fort Bragg on a Thursday, and I walked into UN headquarters in New York on Monday.
So are we still finding the weapons of mass destruction from Iraq, or what's going on?
At this point, it's kind of a dead issue.
I know it's a dead issue, but was that claim that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction was correct or not?
It was incorrect.
Incorrect.
Yeah.
You sure about that?
Quite.
And that's how Colin Powell led to kind of unforced error, right?
Yep. Yep.
Can you tell me more specific activities that you involved in that UN weapons inspection team? Yeah.
I was I worked for the UN Special Commission on Iraq, the organization that was chartered by the Security Council to supervise the destruction of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. And UNSCOM, as it was called, had a concealment investigation team. It turns out in the early 90s, Iraq concealed some documents and materials from the UN, and there was concern that they were continuing to conceal. So I was on a team that was investigating that, including investigating organizations within Iraq that we believed were hiding things, like their intelligence service, their special security organization, some of their most elite military units. And those all became very contentious inspections that led to clashes.
Right.
We were denied entry into certain places. We were kicked out of the country a couple of times, and it came to a head in December of 1997 when we were kicked out for good. And about 24 hours later, Operation Desert Fox took place when the Clinton administration attacked Iraq. Saddam wouldn't then let us back into Iraq, and that was the end of inspections until November of 2002.
How feasible is it to investigate, see if there is a the hidden evidence for any kind of weapons of mass destruction when they do not want to share the evidence? How does it work, actually? Is it feasible?
It's feasible, but extremely difficult. One thing that we had going for us in Iraq was that we had the Security Council charter to go anywhere we wanted to go. Mm-hmm. And the Iraqis were not supposed to deny us. And if they did deny us, then there would be an issue with the Security Council. And of course, that's what happened. But we are able to get into surprising places and to do surprising inspections of places. And we had a variety of technical means of locating things as well.
Technical means to locate and see the traces of it, things like that. But already they evacuated everything, secret documents or whatever, and they tried to clean everything so that there's no trace for it. How successful was it? Out of 100 scale?
It was 99% successful.
Oh, really?
And the UNSCOM effort altogether, I think we very successfully destroyed and accounted for almost everything the Iraqis had. If Iraq still has any remnants of weapons of mass destruction, it's very small.
So according to the percentage you just mentioned, 99%, and you conclude that there was no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq at the time, and 2003 too, right?
Yes.
So why did he invade Iraq?
I think what you have to consider is mindset. We went through this long series of inspections in Iraq where we were denied access to facilities, and it made it seem like the Iraqis were concealing things. In fact, the Iraqis were concealing things. After Saddam Hussein's son-in-law defected in 1995, the Iraqis took the UNSCOM leadership and the IAEA leadership out to a chicken farm that was owned by Hussein Kamel, Saddam's son-in-law. And they revealed 110 footlockers full of documents, along with a bunch of strategic materials, maraging steel, 7075 T aircraft-grade aluminum, all these materials that they claimed they didn't have, including the documents that they claimed had been destroyed long ago. So it was revealed that they had been concealing these things long ago. The resolution that ended the Gulf War required them to declare all their weapons of mass destruction. And they came out, their initial declaration declared about half their missile force and about half their chemical weapons. They declared no biological weapons, and they declared no nuclear weapons or nuclear weapons program. And it turned out that, yes, they had a very active nuclear weapons program, and, oh, by the way, they had an enormous biological weapons program, as well as lots more chemical and missiles. So they started off by lying. So we go through the 90s, and there's a whole history of lies and concealment and cheating. And we could never be sure when the Iraqis were telling us the truth. And I think not only policymakers, but people in the intelligence world were conditioned by that to believe that the Iraqis were always hiding something, even when they claimed to be clean. There's no reason at all to accept that they had given everything up.
Preventive measure. Can we say that?
Well, I think the U.S. government believed that they were still hiding things.
Yeah. That's true, hiding, right? Yeah, we found out that. Anyway, after that, did you work with the White House about these issues, national security issues?
After 9/11, I left the UN, and I went to work for the U.S. government as an analyst for the CIA.
Oh. And?
And I was a military analyst, so I was working on, this was in the run-up to the war, and I was working normal military intelligence sort of issues that you work through when you're going to war. I wasn't directly involved in weapons of mass destruction, but I was aware of it. And then after the war broke out, I went right away. I flew into Iraq and took part in the post-war WMD investigation. And after that, I spent many years doing counterterrorism and counterinsurgency work in Iraq.
Do you know anything about North Koreans' weapons of mass destruction?
I know a little bit, but only a little bit.
What do you know? Can you share that?
I know what's out there. You know, their nuclear weapons program. I know they've had a young, and that they probably have nuclear weapons, that they've explored both enriched uranium and plutonium paths to the bomb. Certainly, they've got multiple delivery means for them, and supposedly quite a lot of chemical weapons.
Do you think that they have capabilities of ICBM? They've been testing a long time. Now they're saying that they have SL, submarine-launched ballistic missile. Do you believe that?
Well, I believe they're certainly working on a submarine-launched ballistic missile, and I believe that they probably have ballistic missiles capable of reaching the United States.
You know, if we really sure that they have a ballistic missile with the accuracy, we got to do something about it, right? Because it's really dangerous.
It is really dangerous.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, it's very interesting. I can go on and go on. I can grill you a whole day.
Can we go back to Korea for a minute?
Yes, go ahead. That's what I wanted to.
I was the liaison to 5th Brigade, and they had counterterrorism responsibilities when I first got there. And at the same time, the Korean government was setting up 707 Battalion, which became like the Korean equivalent of Delta Force. Mm-hmm. So we did a fair amount of high-altitude parachute training with 707. And while I was there, 2 young men with their arms, they got drunk one day. They were soldiers, and they were out near Songnam, and they stole a taxi at gunpoint. And eventually they got into the city, and they holed up in a yogwan in Yeongdeung-po.
Yep.
And my brigade was called out to deal with it. And a sniper from my unit wound up killing one of them, and they assaulted the building and killed the other one during the assault. The next day, I was reading in the Korean Times, which I read every day, that the 2 young men, realizing the error of their ways.
What do you mean?
That these 2 young men in the Yogwan, at some point when they were surrounded, they realized that they had made grave mistakes, and they took their own lives. Which caused me to wonder sometimes about what I was reading in the newspaper.
Right.
There were a series of bad things that happened while I was in Korea. Shortly after I arrived, maybe November, December, of 81 or January of 82, there was a Korean Air Force C-123 full of paratroopers from this airborne school that crashed into a mountain not too far from K-16.
Yep.
And we, as a detachment, in our dress uniforms, we went to the funeral for them, which was held at the National Cemetery. A great, wonderful, solemn ceremony. But it was just a reminder that, Korean soldiers are in this, and they're dying in it, and working hard just like we are. The second thing that happened was KAL 007.
Yep.
It was in September of 83. And of course, there was a lot of...
Steve, can you go down and find...
Yeah.
Of course, there was a lot of concern about it at the time.
Yep.
And shortly thereafter was the Rangoon Bombing.
Yep.
That was in
1980.
October 1983.
3.
And when the Rangoon Bombing took place, a day or 2 later, my boss, I got a call in the evening at home in my quarters in Hanamdong that the boss wanted to meet us for a run in the morning, at 6 in the morning. Now, this was unusual. The boss never met us. His name was Colonel Robert Howard. He was a Medal of Honor winner, and he was a full colonel. The next morning, we all showed up, and we went out and with Colonel Howard, and we trotted along. And he said, because of the Rangoon bombing, the Korean government has declared war on North Korea. They just haven't announced it publicly yet. And I need to have you all go out to your brigades and be helpful and keep an eye on things. And he authorized us to be armed. And so from that point on, for maybe the next month or two, I was out at the brigade every day, armed. When I went out to my brigade that first morning, sure enough, the trucks were all ready to head out the gate. Their tailgates were down, their ammunition was loaded. And, I do believe, without knowing what was happening at higher levels, that we were very close to the outbreak of war over that incident. Obviously, the shoot down of KL 007 was an incredibly sad thing for Korea, and certainly all of us who were there felt it. I think probably all Americans shared that incident as well.
We don't have much time, so I want to ask you the final question. You are the Korea defense veteran. You joined the 169, the Village, Florida chapter of Korean War Veterans Association. You know the Korean War veterans. So now, try to put that into a perspective. They fought for, and you went there in 1980s. Now you know the Korea, and you know the relationship. What is the legacy of the Korean War, and how can we educate our young generation about this historical lesson overall?
Well,
what is the legacy of the Korean War and Korea defense veteran?
The legacy is a successful Korea. You know, a wonderfully prosperous, developed, democratic Korea. None of that would have happened if we had not been there. None of it would have happened if those efforts hadn't been maintained over many years since 1953. If we'd gotten out after 20 years, Kim Jong-un might be in charge now, but he's not. And South Korea is the prosperous democratic place that it is. You know, just a wonderful place and a tribute to what people can do in my lifetime. So I'm proud to be a defense veteran, and I hope every one of those men who fought in the war is exceptionally proud that his sacrifices have allowed this sort of miracle to take place. So, very proud to be a Korean veteran.
Thank you for your service, and thank you for coming for an interview, sharing your story. And I hope that we can have more time and we'll chat over the food together, okay?
Sounds wonderful.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Very intelligent interviews.